Hello, my lovelies. My name's Gilbert Dolthalion, and the plan for today is to pattern and to make the mock-up for Aziraphale's hose. For those of you who aren't familiar with medieval clothing, hose were worn in one form or another for a huge chunk of European history as underwear for both men and women. They did undergo a little bit of change along the way, but by the time of the Tudors they were joined together at the crotch to make a pair of hose that didn't look unlike today's leggings. I'm not the only costuber who's made a pair, so I'm going to link a couple of videos below that cover different periods, different styles, and different methods of construction if you're interested to see more after this video. Since hose are a close-fitted garment, most patterns will want you to have a helper on hand to help you fit them, but I wanted to show that they can be done alone. So my first step was to make a duct tape model of my legs to use as a base for the pattern. You can check that video from the card or the link down below, but you don't need to know anything other than the fact that it existed to continue with this video. Once again, I was also using the Tudor tailor as my main reference, and now that you know all of that, let's get on with the mock-up. As we know, mock-ups are always important, but since hose are close-fitted and cut on the bias, it's even more important to save you wasting fabric, and even if you have a pair of helping hands, it's worth making at least one pair for your first pair. Hose always have the seam up the back of the leg, so I cut my duct tape model that way, which allowed me to copy that directly to get the pattern for the bottom half of my leg. The foot was a bit trickier, and I made some adjustments that I hoped would be closer to the Tudor tailor pattern, but as you'll see later, I wasn't particularly successful. It's also important to mark the knee and a midline to help line up the thigh portion, and as what I would be using for the thigh already had a seam allowance, I added that too. For said thigh portion, I went back to the mock-up I made for the lining of the trunk hose, because I knew they were close fitting along my thigh. As they were cut with a side seam, to change it to a back seam, I folded it in half, seam to seam, and then placed it along the midline, lining up the knees and making sure that the crotch was on the same side as the inside of the foot. I needed to feel for the crotch to mark it, lifting along where I'd already marked, but keeping the rest in place to check it. Then, to help show any misplacement with my midline, I folded the whole lot in half along the midline before cutting it out. There was a slight misalignment along the waist, but I decided to go with my original markings there as I didn't want the crotch seam too far over. Finally, I copied it, but didn't cut the second leg yet, because before cutting a meter's worth of fabric, I wanted to check that the fit wasn't completely off. Okay, so I'm going to be sewing this on a zigzag stitch, which would be C on my machine. Obviously it depends what machine, but you can adjust how big the zigzag stitch is. So before I stitch, I'm going to have a little play around and see how wide I want the zigzag to be, because I haven't really played around with this setting before. So it would help if I threaded my machine, I guess. Now that it's threaded, let's try this again. So this is on the full zigzag. And then I'm going to try it about halfway. So you can see that that zigzag is a lot thinner than this one, which is what we're going for. I just want to try it one further as well, but I need to redo the bobbin for that. And that's all three complete. The reason that we're doing them this way is because they should give a bit of stretch. Obviously, because it's on the bias, it will need that bit of stretch. So if you're not doing it by hand, which is what I will be doing later, then you need to sew it on the zigzag stitch. I'm probably going to do it on the middle one, I think. And then that seems to still give enough stretch, but be fairly thin. Yeah, let's get the first one done. Okay, so obviously this is now sewn on my zigzag stitch. I've also tried it on and it fits perfectly. I'm not going to show you because obviously I'm not wearing a lot when I'm trying it on. I've also gone ahead and pinned the foot in place. These flaps on the design, I have done them wrong and they've just ended up being unnecessary additional fabric, which isn't great because I wanted to stick to the authentic pattern, but I think I'm just going to go for it. So I'm just going to sew this as it is, then pin it again, which will probably involve taking out these flaps entirely, and then go with that. Since it mostly fits, it would just be redoing the feet, and that is going to involve drafting them completely fresh. I might do, we'll see. Anyway, long story short, this needs to be sewn next, and then I'm going to try and transfer this onto the other leg so that I can have two hose, a pair of hose that will be joined, so that I can check that it actually fits around the waist, which is where I'm worried about it, and then show you guys as well. Okay, so I now have a pair of trunk hose with the seams on the back here and everything working as they should. They look right. I think pre-pandemic I would leave this at this stage. However, we live in a post-pandemic world and post-pandemic pounds are a thing, and they're just a teensy bit too tight for comfort. So I think I'm going to do a second mock-up just to enlarge them a little bit. The feet are being a pain in the ass. Yeah, these just didn't work. So what I'm going to do is ignore these. When I trace the pattern back over, I'm just going to go back to the original pattern, the one that I cut, the duct tape one, and redo the feet entirely and see if that works better. So having a second mock-up gives me a second chance to try the feet. If the second try doesn't work, then I'm just going to go back to the method that I've used before, because I've gone back and done some more research and decided that that's fine. It's not the one that's in the Tudor tailor, but that did exist, so that's fine. So I'm going to redo the feet entirely. I'm going to add it gets about 2 centimeters on each leg over the thighs, and I'm also going to cut the pattern open just above the crotch and add in an extra centimeter or 2 there just to give me a bit more length, because at the moment I'm getting a bit of a builder's bum, which is not pleasant for anyone. Even though I'm going to have a million layers over the top of it, I just would rather not have a builder's bum. Normally I wouldn't bother doing a second mock-up, but in this specific case there's just those combination of those 3 tiny things. The feet in particular isn't really a tiny thing, but the other 2 I wouldn't bother doing a second mock-up for, but because I've got the feet to redo as well, I feel like I need to do a second mock-up so I can try and streamline those before I actually go on the actual hose. But in principle this works fine. There's not that much to change. I'm pretty pleased with how the pattern worked out. This isn't something that could have been fixed by someone fitting it on me either, because it's too tight for a start. Well, I guess I would have made it larger to begin with if I was going to have it fitted on me, but like, doing 2 mock-ups isn't the end of the world. That's what mock-ups are for, right? So I'm going to cut this open on the seams now, so I've got it open on the sew lines. Redo the feet from the original pattern, like I said, and then add in the extra length. So let's get to that. At this stage, my first step should have just been to trace around the damn thing, but I got ahead of myself and mapped out the changes to the top section without actually separating it. So once I'd realised that, I drew a line between the knee and the bottom of the crotch and cut the initial mock-up open there. Then I pulled it up enough to give me that extra space at the top and went back to work adding the extra space in the thigh. It actually turned out to be rather useful, as this was the second leg, so I could see just how badly I'd copied it over originally and could balance the two out. This is what an uncontrolled bias will do to your careful work, kids. I copied the original tracing from the duct tape pattern to try and re-pattern the foot. Once I'd made my alterations again, there were rather too many lines, so I came back in with a blue marker to mark out my actual cutting lines to save me from getting confused, and then I added a seam allowance along the whole length. My tape measure is 1.5 centimeters wide, so I could just use it as measure. For once, I was relatively smart and managed to measure out how much fabric I needed before cutting for shopping purposes. And then, finally, I could cut it out, this time with the fabric folded, so I had 2 exact copies. I also copied the sole of the foot back out and added a seam allowance and cut 2 of those. And then it was back to the machine to get everything together. So these were mostly a success. The foot I'm definitely going to have to redo, it just didn't work. I will have to look at the pattern again sometime in the future if I'm going to make another pair, but for now I'm just going to use the pattern that I have, that I know works from other shoes that I've done. The waist is now too large, but it fits great over the hips, so I'm just going to take out a little bit around the waist on the actual pair. The front is a bit too high as well, so that is going to need to be cut down, but that's easy enough. I'm just going to do that on this pair and then take that over, because that's like a couple of inches of fabric that I can save then for using the lining of the doublet. So all in all, pretty successful. I'm now going to go fabric shopping. Yay! So, with all of that, the hose are now ready to go for real. I went back to the pattern later and realised that in retrospect I just cut the foot on my duct tape model completely wrong, so in the future I'm going to need to go back and start fresh with that. I think my plan of action for next time I make a pair of hose is to start with what I have, chop off the foot and print off the foot pattern from the Tudor tailor and just re-pattern the foot entirely from scratch. But I'm really pleased with the fit on the top half. Using the duct tape model worked really well to get a good fit over the calf and the knees, and it's relatively easy to fit something over your thigh without contorting yourself too much. So if you don't have something that fits really well already like I did, it's relatively easy to whip yourself something up that does fit there. If you are going to make something to fit on yourself for the thigh, I would recommend doing something with the side seams, because obviously the reason that I could fit the linings for the trunk hose to myself is because they have those side seams, because unless you're unusually flexible, trying to fit a back seam is not possible for most people. Certainly not for me. My question for you today is, when was the last time you thought you were following a pattern or a set of instructions, only to realise that you were completely off and you'd completely misremembered them? It's so easy to do. Human brains are so good at making things up as they go along and just completely misremembering things. Thank you for watching through to the end, and as always, a massive thank you to all of my subscribers. You guys are the best. Thank you. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful or interesting, please think about giving me a like and subscribing if you're not already for more sewing and costume related content, not to mention the second half of this adventure in 3 weeks. Stay safe, stay sensible, and I shall see you again soon. Bye!